Hello, my name is Amanda Nickerson. I'm the K-12 Literacy Consultant at the Stark County Educational Service Center, and I will be your presenter for this session today. I am so excited to be able to virtually deliver professional development to help support you, your students, and Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. Let's get started. The time has come to reconceptualize literacy. The fact is, some of our students don't understand the words, don't understand the sentences, can't build a text base, can't build a mental model, and don't have the skills for academic conversations, and we are all responsible for filling in the gaps. We know that there are myriad causes of reading difficulties, even in older struggling readers, including a learning disability such as a language disorder, dyslexia, a processing speed or fluency disorder, a generally low learning ability that may manifest across all subjects. We see language, experiential, or vocabulary deficits on school entry, poor attendance, inconsistency in schooling, limited English proficiency, and sometimes even insufficiently powerful instruction within our classrooms. Some of the aforementioned causes are biological or pathological but treatable, and others may be ameliorated or eliminated by making thoughtful, intentional changes to our instruction. We simply cannot afford to close our eyes to the glaring need. According to the 2017 NAEP, the overall achievement level results in reading leave something to be desired. Only 37% of fourth graders scored proficient or advanced on the assessment. 31% scored in the basic range, and 32% scored in the below basic range. Only 36% of 8th graders scored proficient or advanced on the assessment, 40% scored in the basic range, and 24% scored in the below basic range. This is a rather bleak picture of how our nation's students are currently performing in reading. But there's great news. Compelling evidence from a convergence of reading research indicates that between 90 and 95% of all students can achieve literacy skills at or approaching grade level. We can change the data and students' futures. This is where Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement comes in. This flexible guide is designed to be a working document to meet state, regional, and local needs for supporting language and literacy development. I encourage all teachers to read through Ohio's plan because literacy as used here is not synonymous with English language arts. Literacy is bigger than ELA. It's an umbrella term, and it encompasses all of the content areas from birth through 12th grade. This is a document that is intended to guide all of us. Allow me to explain. In 2000, the National Reading Panel identified 5 essential components of reading instruction. This model, adapted by the Michigan Department of Education and adopted by the Ohio Department of Education, shows how this emphasis shifts as we move into the intermediate grades and beyond. For example, phonemic awareness and phonics are 2 crucial components in grades K through 3, and word study, specifically morphology and syllabication, remains an important component for adolescents. Now, I've been in education long enough to witness the metaphorical pendulum swing a few times. It is important to note that the science of reading is not another pendulum swing. You will hear me make the case for foundational skills within the context of disciplinary literacy, but please understand that this is not about overemphasizing word recognition skills. This is not about spending an inordinate amount of time on phonemic awareness, phonics, and word study. However, we cannot continue to overemphasize comprehension, and this is exactly what we have done historically speaking. We have to address the elephant in the room. Problems with underlying linguistic structures may be obscured. We interpret nearly everything as a comprehension problem. We often say, Billy can't comprehend the text. Or we perceive weak comprehension skills, and they really do exist. They aren't figments of our imagination, and they do surface on our state tests and other assessments. We see them day to day. So we give Billy more of the same, and we ask him to find the main idea in details, make predictions, make inferences, summarize, and compare and contrast. We attempt to pinpoint the need and target the perceived gaps, but we largely target comprehension, especially in the intermediate grades and beyond. But what if? What if Billy is still struggling to comprehend because he doesn't match letters to the sounds they represent? He doesn't know how to decode unknown words. He doesn't have automaticity. He can't read fluently, or his vocabulary is limited. What may look like a comprehension problem on the surface may be a symptom of an underlying deficit, meaning focused instruction won't remediate a word-level problem. It is imperative that we are able to recognize a decoding problem. Students typically guess from context. They avoid sounding out new words. They confuse similar sounds, symbols, or words. They inaccurately read nonsense words or words out of context. They're slow to develop sight word habits. They have small vocabularies as a result. They tire easily. They look away. They're easily frustrated, and they often hate to read. Often for these students, listening comprehension is better than reading comprehension. They understand more when they are read to than they comprehend when they are expected to read independently. This is a big red flag. When students exhibit any of these behaviors, we simply have to act. This is a simplified diagram that shows the hierarchy of reading and how we should respond. Teaching phonology and phonics improves accuracy, and accuracy is the most pressing concern. It provides the foundation for more sophisticated tasks. Once students read accurately, we must work to improve their fluency and automaticity. Automaticity frees working memory to focus on comprehension. If students continue to read inaccurately and laboriously, comprehension will be impeded in literally every content area. Unfortunately, we've been putting the carts before the horse. Let's unpack this. Does accuracy matter? The answer is an emphatic yes. If students don't have strong phonological awareness and decoding skills, they make errors. They may guess based on the first letter, but there's a huge difference between first and final, 50 and 15, ostrich and owl. Kids may guess the most common word like house instead of home. And if the connotation is impacted, their comprehension will suffer. When they guess, this impacts comprehension. Accuracy matters. If you're trying to teach sophisticated concepts within your discipline, precision matters. Consider this: the most unimportant word in the English language, matters for comprehension. We have to teach our students accuracy. There's a big difference between my mom got cold and my mom got a cold. And yet this is something we often shirk within our own lessons. We have to remember that accuracy paves the way for fluency. To read a text, one has to read the words independently. Some students may still need some instruction in phonological awareness and or phonics. And many know basic sounds and spelling patterns, but their oral reading fluency suffers. We can address accuracy through word study, and this has a place in every classroom, in every school, though it will be nuanced. The problem is we make a lot of assumptions, such as believing that we are teaching kids how to read in the primary grades, and that by the intermediate and secondary grades, all of our kids are magically learning how to read and reading to learn. When the truth is, some of them still can't read accurately or fluently. Some of them are still learning how to read. We have to challenge our assumptions. As Anita Archer likes to say, when our assumptions lead to dire consequences, we commit a suicide. Let's examine one of the ways we're probably all guilty of a suicide. We tend to emphasize what is tested. This means we focus a lot on vocabulary, comprehension, and writing in response to text. Unfortunately, we have students who have cracks in their foundations. They have underdeveloped word recognition skills. They may have phonological deficits. They may have weak phonic decoding skills. They may lack automaticity. They may be disfluent. Those missing steps have huge ramifications. It impacts how much working memory is available to attend to vocabulary, comprehension, and writing. It creates a major obstacle for our students to try to scale. Vocabulary knowledge, for example, must be intentionally nurtured to ensure that students are ready for the greater vocabulary demands of reading complex texts and writing multi-paragraph essays. But we need to pay attention to the cracks in the foundation, or it all falls apart. To ensure that our students are equipped to pass the test and ultimately to participate fully in our society as adults, we need to be intentional about how we're addressing the 5 components of reading and writing in our classrooms. We need to intentionally focus on building a strong foundation and fill in the gaps to enable our students to have solid footing on the stairway to success. If, for example, a student struggles with reading multisyllabic words, even by 4th grade, they will have a difficult time navigating texts on the Ohio State test. They will also struggle with understanding reading prompts and answer choices. Again, sometimes what looks like a comprehension problem is actually caused by an underlying subskill. I want to reiterate, this is not a pendulum swing. This is a call for a paradigm shift. By definition, a paradigm shift describes a fundamental change in approach or an underlying assumption that governs the behavior of an individual, group, organization, or society. And Teach Them All to Read, Catching Kids Before They Fall Through the Cracks, Elaine McEwen identifies several paradigms that impact reading achievement. We used to think that demographics were a big determinant of students' academic destiny. Now we focus less on deficits and more on providing opportunities to learn. We used to wait and see as a solution for struggling readers, hoping they would catch up. But now we know that we must prioritize prevention and intervention, and those kids sometimes never catch up without it. We used to believe that reading is natural, but now we know that speaking is natural, reading is rocket science, and that we literally rewire the neural pathways in the brain when we learn to read. We used to believe that the best way to teach reading was through whole group instruction, but now we know that differentiation must be a part of the equation. We used to believe that teachers could have complete autonomy over instructional materials and methods, but now we know that teachers must make decisions based on scientifically based reading research, not their own preferences and teaching philosophies. We used to think that there were many inalterable variables that contributed to student failure, but now we know that the brain is malleable, and we focus instead on alterable variables by promoting a growth mindset. We also discard competitive school cultures in favor of a more collaborative, team-oriented culture. When we know better, we do better. This point is worth reiterating. Reading is among the highest expressions of human intelligence, and it is critical to our ability to thrive within our society. Teaching children to read proficiently is a fundamental moral obligation. As Louisa Moats has famously said, teaching reading is rocket science. It is imperative that we help students rewire their brains for reading. This means that effective instruction for struggling students necessitates continuous formative assessments and progress monitoring, explicit instruction in literacy-related foundational skills, and a focus on higher order level thinking to promote engagement. This starts with intentional Tier 1 core instruction across classrooms and content areas. All students require focused, intentional instruction in both general academic and domain-specific academic vocabulary. All students benefit from explicit instruction and strategies to understand their specific types of text. All students benefit from explicit instruction in writing by seeing models, deconstructing texts, writing to imitate, and writing text to read. But struggling students need more. Even middle and high school educators need to be knowledgeable about early reading instruction so they can recognize and address the foundational gaps that some students may exhibit. These include phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, and basic comprehension, as well as language and syntax. So what do our students, especially older struggling students, deserve? Students who are not reading and writing at grade level require intervention. Knowing what they need requires diagnostic measures well beyond standardized tests. Students who lack fluency or who are struggling with decoding words must be taught those skills, as no amount of comprehension will solve their problem. We also must consider this. Dr. Joseph Turgeson has said, "We will never teach all of our students to read if we do not teach our students who have the greatest difficulties to read." Another way to say this is getting to 100% requires going through the bottom 20%. And this is going to require everyone to be all hands on deck as we examine our own content with a fine-tooth comb and examine the literacy skills that undergird our content. Since the inception of the Common Core standards, the standards have emphasized challenging texts, close reading, writing from sources, informational text, multiple texts or text sets, argument, embedded technology, and disciplinary literacy. Pause for a moment to reflect. Are these shifts intentionally employed inside and outside of the English language arts classroom? Why or why not? You may decide to pause this presentation to momentarily jot down your response. The Common Core Standards has ushered in many instructional shifts. Disciplinary literacy specifically has the potential to change outcomes for our students. So how do we create a school-wide culture of disciplinary literacy? We ask ourselves the following questions. Do students read every day in every class? Do students write every day in every class? Do students inquire by asking more questions than they answer? Do students hear complex text read aloud in every discipline? Do students collaborate, find, evaluate, and apply new learning? Do students critically solve problems? Do they have opportunities to engage in meaningful discussions every single day? Hopefully the answer to every question is yes. But if there are bubbles that are being unaddressed, this will hopefully provide you with a roadmap and a starting point for cross-curricular and interdepartmental discussions. As aforementioned, literacy doesn't just pertain to English language arts. As Relea Lent explains, current thinking about literacy places reading and writing in its rightful place, firmly rooted within each discipline. This new model, aptly called disciplinary literacy, recognizes that reading, writing, thinking, reasoning, and doing within each discipline is unique and leads to the understanding that every field of study creates, communicates, and evaluates knowledge differently. Disciplinary literacy is focused on apprenticing students into the disciplines. It's not about bringing ELA standards, methods, or approaches to the subject area classroom. Each discipline has its own ways of using text to create, disseminate, and evaluate knowledge, and it is this that the new standards are asking us to teach. Disciplinary literacy essentially asks, what is different across the disciplines? Tim and Cynthia Shanahan articulate that disciplinary literacy is grounded in inquiry and emphasizes how students use the knowledge they're learning as a tool to participate in the work within that discipline. We know that reading within a discipline doesn't simply mean unlocking the text or answering questions related to comprehension. It means that students understand how purpose and context inform their reading, and that the act of reading can differ depending upon the text. Disciplines differ by purposes and sources of information. They differ by how they view authors and their circumstances as an interpretive tool. They differ in how they utilize graphics and types of vocabulary. Disciplinary literacy is important because each discipline has specialized habits of the mind or ways of thinking, language and vocabulary, nuances and subtleties, text types to comprehend, ways of communicating and writing, and career requirements. The bottom line is students must be equipped to navigate literacy across disciplines. Content area literacy, by contrast, focuses on improving reading comprehension and study skills with content textbooks. It emphasizes teaching supporting reading skills with content texts. The mantra is, every teacher, a teacher of reading. It's the Oprah approach to teaching. It's saying you get a KWL chart and you get a KWL chart. Everyone gets a KWL chart. It basically asks, what is the same across the disciplines? Previously, content area literacy was exclusively promoted, but the emergence of disciplinary literacy shouldn't cause us to abandon it entirely. It is possible for content area literacy and disciplinary literacy to coexist because there is a need for both. Content area literacy instruction provides students with a toolbox of more generalizable strategies to use whenever a complex text is encountered. They may, for example, use a KWL chart in ELA, science, history, or math. Disciplinary literacy strategies come out of the demands of the text and the purposes of the discipline, and those will be more nuanced, specialized, and diverse. Content area reading and disciplinary literacy can both improve literacy and can both work in tandem. But without paying attention to what is different in the disciplines, students won't improve as much. Paying attention to unique features in the disciplines is something that subject teachers can do and should do. This is important because throughout students' formal schooling, they are taught increasingly specialized and sophisticated but less generalizable literacy skills and routines. In the earliest years, we focus on basic literacy skills, building foundational skills such as decoding, print and literacy conventions, recognizing high-frequency words, basic punctuation, and so forth. Then at the intermediate literacy stage, students develop more sophisticated skills. They begin decoding multisyllabic words, improving reading fluency, expanding vocabulary, and they have more exposure to advanced texts, among other things. At the apex of this pyramid of complexity is disciplinary literacy. It is the content-specific literacy skills that are required in particular disciplines, but note that it is built upon intermediate and basic literacy skills. It's not completely independent from those underlying skills. It is in some ways dependent upon them to support the meaning-making that we strive for within our disciplines. This is another way of investigating the increasing specialization of literacy. The peaks of each pyramid reveal a changing emphasis across the grade level continuum. In the early grades, basic literacy is emphasized. In the intermediate grades, intermediate literacy is prioritized, and by high school, disciplinary literacy is king. Note that the pyramids overlap, and depending on student strengths and weaknesses, they may be at different places on the continuum, but this graphic does illustrate the ultimate goal. Now, let's dig a little deeper. This means that we teach disciplinary literacy skills beginning in elementary school, but we prioritize basic literacy skill development. It also means that even when we are emphasizing intermediate literacy or disciplinary literacy skills, we may need to provide scaffolds or interventions for underlying skills to be successful within our disciplines. The simple view of reading illustrates that reading comprehension is the product of word recognition, those decoding skills and the ability to read words on a page, and also language comprehension, understanding those words. In order to read competently and proficiently, students need to have strengths in both domains. The simple view of reading also helps us contextualize the 4 reading profiles of the students in our schools. Skilled readers have good language comprehension and good word recognition. Students with specific reading comprehension difficulties have poor language comprehension, but they have skilled word recognition. They are students who truly need targeted intervention on the language comprehension side of the SVR, the simple view of reading. Students with specific word recognition difficulties have good language comprehension, but they have poor word recognition. Students with mixed reading difficulties have poor language comprehension and poor word recognition. The 2 profiles on the left side of the chart require explicit, systematic, multisensory phonemic awareness and phonics instruction, but as a reminder, all kids benefit from it. Students with specific word recognition difficulties may require systematic phonemic awareness and phonics instruction, in addition to fluency and multisyllabic word interventions. Students with mixed reading difficulties may require explicit instruction in word recognition skills, coupled with explicit instruction in specific areas of comprehension. Students with specific reading comprehension difficulties need more practice with comprehension strategies, syntactic structures, language, and vocabulary. While students should receive this additional targeted instruction in tiers 2 and 3, we all can provide scaffolds across the school day, across contexts, and across disciplines within our tier 1 regular classroom lessons to support our struggling students. The radical truth about reading, as I've borrowed from Linda Diamond, is that reading comprehension is a product of strong language comprehension and word recognition skills. Reading comprehension tests don't assess individual skills or standards. Reading comprehension isn't or mainly isn't a skilled activity. Reading comprehension tests aren't diagnostic tests. They can't and won't reveal skill differences. And quite frankly, analyzing item performance is not and will never be the game changer. The radical truth is, in order to raise reading comprehension and performance, we have to teach students to read. If students cannot read, they will struggle with word problems, reading and by extension, writing lab reports, and analyzing primary sources like the Declaration of Independence. We all have to commit to this task. The simple view of reading is expanded upon through Scarborough's reading rope. This theoretical model shows that word recognition skills are our primary concerns, and they should become increasingly automatic over time. Language comprehension skills are our secondary concerns, and they should become increasingly more strategic. Over time, these overlapping skills lead to strong reading comprehension, but if an individual thread is missing or tattered, the whole rope is weaker as a result. Comprehension may be impeded. We see this across disciplines, not just in language arts. The word recognition skills remain the same across disciplines. Students must have sufficient phonological awareness, decoding skills, and sight word vocabularies to read the words, period, in every class, at every grade level. The top of the rope, however, looks different depending on the subject area. The ropes are structurally similar, yet diverse and nuanced. In ELA, the language comprehension strands consist of components like background knowledge about facts and concepts, vocabulary as it pertains to breadth, precision, links, and so forth, language structures as it pertains to syntax, semantics, etc., verbal reasoning such as inference and metaphor, and literacy knowledge such as print concepts and genres. In English language arts, we must show students to read like bibliophiles by teaching them how to look for ways that characters, setting, and conflicts may influence the meaning of the text, how to find underlying messages that evolve as a theme, how to recognize devices that authors use to enhance their writing, such as flashback, hyperbole, or analogy, how to summarize and synthesize ideas in nonfiction and events in fiction, how to understand how voice works to construct meaning, how to pay attention to new vocabulary or how new words are used in unusual ways, how to understand and use the effect of figurative language, how to read skeptically, discerning unreliable narrators or characters, and how to read nonfiction critically, looking for bias or fallacies in reasoning, how to use reading as a way to make connections or understand real-world issues, and how to use text structure as a tool for comprehension and engage in a mental dialogue with the author. In science, the language comprehension strands consist of components like background knowledge about facts and concepts, vocabulary, largely technical terms, language structures that are succinct and precise, verbal reasoning such as informed skepticism and integrating results and data, and literacy knowledge such as tables, graphs, and comparing findings. In science, we must show students how to read like scientists by teaching them how to assume an objective stance, search for answers to relevant questions, sift through and evaluate quality and quantity of evidence, look for data-based outcomes, collaborate with colleagues when faced with complex ideas, consider alternatives to what has been presented, understand that theories are subject to change, seek out more current findings, determine validity of source, decipher vocabulary necessary for conceptual understanding, question reasoning and conclusions, pay attention to detail and numbers, chart, illustrate, and graph data and conclusions, and ask why more than what. In mathematics, the language comprehension strands consist of components like background knowledge about mathematical concepts and skills, vocabulary, words with technical and non-technical meanings and symbols, language structures with extreme precision and unique formulations such as let X be, verbal reasoning, integrating those verbal and mathematical thoughts, and literacy knowledge such as multiple representations of the same concepts in equations, graphs, figures, and also narrative. In mathematics, we must show students how to read like mathematicians by teaching them how to use the information they're reading as pieces of a puzzle to be solved, how to act as investigators, looking for patterns and relationships, to ask questions as they read, to read for accuracy and clear mathematical reasoning, how to apply previously learned mathematical concepts and think about how vocabulary may be used differently in math contexts, how to make meaning out of mathematical symbols and abstract ideas, to seek to understand what the problem is asking them to do rather than only reading for information, how to identify misconceptions or points of confusion and scrutinize the ways that math is reported in the media or in real-world applications while looking for what is missing. In history, the language comprehension strands consist of components like background knowledge, facts and concepts, vocabulary such as historical and technical terms, language structure such as historical syntax and nominalization, verbal reasoning, avoiding presentism and contextualization, and literacy knowledge, such as genre knowledge, multiple texts, primary and secondary sources, timelines, and maps. In history, we must show students to read like historians by teaching them how to compare and contrast events, accounts, documents, and visuals, such as infographics and photographs. We have to help them create narratives from existing information, situate new understandings within background knowledge, make inferences, and determine what is important from what is merely interesting. Determine the meaning of words within context. Interpret primary and secondary sources with an eye toward bias. Use knowledge of the present to make sense of the past, and vice versa. Think sequentially to piece together timelines and untangle threads of fact from often conflicting accounts and perspectives. Regardless of the subject you happen to teach, within a multi-tiered system of supports, the goal is prevention. The goal is to build a strong foundation by explicitly teaching foundational skills to mastery. According to Dr. David Kilpatrick, we have to face the reality that in students with a phonological core deficit, phonological awareness does not naturally develop via exposure to literacy activities, even explicit and systematic phonics instruction or morphology and word study. Thus, phonological awareness must be directly trained in these students. This will look different in every grade level and content area. It will look different in core instruction than it will in Tier 2 or 3 interventions, but we all have a part to play nevertheless. Research reveals that poor readers' problems often begin with phonology. The language skills that most reliably distinguish groups of good and poor readers are specific to the phonological or speech sound processing system, and these problems persist even into adulthood without intervention, particularly for students with dyslexia. Phonological problems may impact students' awareness of consonants, vowels, onsets, rhymes, syllables, grammatical endings, meaningful parts, and the spelling units that represent them. Tolman's hourglass figure helps us understand how morphology instruction builds upon what is taught in elementary school. Students are taught phonological awareness tasks like how to identify sentences, words, and syllables. Then they learn how to segment, blend, and stretch phonemes. Eventually, they learn how to delete, substitute, and reverse phonemes. All of these tasks can be done orally and in the dark since no print is necessary. When students begin to map speech to print or phonemes to graphemes, phonics instruction begins. They progress through a particular scope and sequence from basic phonics to advanced phonics. Early on, students are introduced to some morphemes, particularly inflectional endings. But once the 6 syllable types are mastered, morphology becomes an even bigger priority. This is when word study begins to emphasize roots and affixes as well as word origins. As aforementioned, there is a shifting emphasis. With respect to phonics, this means we need kids to master basic phonics and phonemic awareness to equip them for advanced phonics and multisyllabic word reading. From 4th grade and beyond, the emphasis is on multisyllabic words, and this has implications across all content areas. This is not something that only pertains to language arts. We want our students to be able to self-teach and read widely and often, to continually add new words and concepts to the file cabinets in their brains. To do this, students must have strong word recognition skills. So what is word recognition? The ability to recognize whole words depends on the ability to recognize the units from which a word is built. The layers from the bottom up represent a rough sequence of development in word recognition ability. The layers viewed from the top down represent what a good reader already knows about a familiar printed word. We begin teaching letters and sounds in kindergarten, and we work our way up the chart. By the time students are adolescents, we presume that they have a large sight word vocabulary, many words they can retrieve and read immediately by sight. But if they don't, we have to work backwards to assess their knowledge of morphemes and syllables. Thus, this is a helpful tool for conceptualizing prevention and remediation of word recognition skills. Marcia Henry's language triangle also helps us closely examine the layers of our language. Her recommended morphology scope and sequence overlaps with every single grade level from kindergarten through 12th grade. The Anglo-Saxon layer should be taught first because it is comprised of short, common, everyday words. The monosyllabic nature of these words make it the perfect starting place for kindergarten through 1st grade. The Latin and Romance layer is usually introduced in mid-2nd through 5th grade. It is full of technical, sophisticated language. Finally, the Greek layer is often taught in middle school and high school across disciplines because of its specialized vocabulary. Again, this chart shows how each layer of our language is built upon the skills that precede it. Everything builds upon phonological awareness. It helps students link letters to sounds. This leads to the exploration of Anglo-Saxon consonants and vowels, compound words, prefixes and suffixes, and syllable division patterns. All of this supports the acquisition of knowledge about Latin roots and ultimately Greek combining forms. This chart illuminates how letter-sound correspondences, syllables, and morphemes differ according to the layer of language. Note that most scientific and mathematical terms are comprised of Greek roots. Morphology has huge implications for content area vocabulary instruction and ultimately for the comprehension and application of disciplinary knowledge. But gaps at any language level will yield negative consequences for our students. Again, it is worth repeating that phonological awareness must be directly trained in our students regardless of their age. And we must teach them from the easiest to the hardest, the biggest to the smallest units, as shown in Tolman's hourglass figure. In the early grades, this means teaching compound words, syllables, and onset and rhyme, and progressing to the phoneme level. Students must be able to isolate, identify, and categorize phonemes. To read, they must be able to blend and segment phonemes and words. At the highest level, ideally by the end of 3rd grade, students must be able to delete, add, and substitute phonemes. Again, though, we know that some of these deficits may persist, and they do, even into high school and beyond. When this happens, we have to remediate. At the middle school and high school levels, word recognition proficiency is assumed by the state standards. This is true in the intermediate grades too. In reality, the majority of struggling readers are not proficient and require many more hours of instruction. Most require explicit systematic instruction in the word reading component, along with explicit instruction in text reading and writing. So, does phonemic awareness have a role in intervention with older students too? Yes, and it does because phonemic awareness is the underpinning for word recognition. Again, phonological weaknesses continue to affect and explain reading difficulties at all ages. Many students in middle and high school interventions will have unremediated deficits in phonological awareness and will benefit from additional practice. though the nature of this work will vary from the work done with younger students. Ideally, students should receive Tier 2 interventions in addition to high-quality core instruction. Dr. David Kilpatrick reminds us that there is no statute of limitation on training phoneme awareness skills when they are weak. If students at any age are poor readers, check their phoneme awareness skills and address them if they are inadequate. The actual interventions go beyond the scope and sequence of this presentation, but I would be remiss if I did not articulate that they are a non-negotiable. They should be happening in our elementary schools, our intermediate schools, our middle schools, and our high schools. Without this layer of support, students will continue to languish and underperform. They will also continue to loathe reading, a skill set that is necessary and critical in our society and in our larger world. This is something we simply cannot afford to ignore. So why am I spending so much time addressing your entire staff about phonemic awareness? Because as Dr. David Kilpatrick has asserted, every point in a child's development of word level reading is substantially affected by phonological awareness skills, from learning letter names all the way up to efficiently adding new multisyllabic words to their automatic word vocabulary. And I would like to add that this also pertains to multisyllabic domain-specific vocabulary in chemistry, history, or an algebra class. So what do students need to know about syllabication? They need to know what a syllable is and how to orally segment and blend syllables. They need to know that every syllable has a vowel sound and that almost all syllables have one or more vowels. We must always ensure that students can read real and nonsense single syllable words accurately before teaching students to read multisyllabic words. It's worth considering that they must be able to read ab and scond before they're able to read the unfamiliar word abscond. Again, this isn't just for language arts. Many spelling patterns are present in our content area vocabulary. Consider how a student who struggles with the 6-syllable types would struggle with the words grassland, veto, southeast, workforce, timeline, or battle in a history classroom. Consider how even simple spelling patterns at the basic phonics level are required to access words such as census, basin, civil, status, and bias. In mathematics, they might struggle with words like common, finite, valid, angle, fluid, input, zero, spreadsheet, error, guideline, or sample. In science, they may struggle with words such as cosmic, fiber, solid, mantle, geode, wetland, Pluto, greenhouse, earthworm, limestone, or simple. In ELA, they may struggle with words like cognate, climax, novel, fable, poem, flashback, hero, proofread, horror, timeline, or tables. Here are 2 simple ways to assess students with multisyllabic words. We can answer questions like, how do I spell? By asking students to say the word, then break it into syllables. We can guide the students to spell each syllable correctly. We can also teach students to spell specific words by showing them the word first and teaching them to match oral syllables to written syllables. Allow me to demonstrate how we can embed this routine into the beginning of your vocabulary routine for strategically chosen words, especially words that are frequently difficult and historically mispronounced by students. Before teaching vocabulary words, we must remember to pre-assess our students. Pre-assessment is important to compact and differentiate the curriculum. Assessing levels of word knowledge can be a helpful starting point. Students can indicate their familiarity with each term by holding up 1 through 5 fingers, or they can write digits on a rating chart next to each term. Once you're ready to introduce the word, you may want to begin with its pronunciation. Let's say you're reading To Kill a Mockingbird and you've identified segregation as a critical vocabulary word to facilitate understanding. Face the students as you emphasize the word by stating it loudly and clearly. This word is segregation. Have students repeat the word at least twice, assisting them with pronunciation as needed. Say the word with me, segregation. What word? Segregation. Now have your students tap out the word. Tap and say the syllables in segregation. Segregation. Repeat the multisyllabic word to students in syllable chunks. As students say the chunked word, they will place dots in the bottom of boxes for each syllable they hear. For example, segregation. Say the multisyllabic word again. Students will spell each syllable. Each syllable should be placed above the corresponding dots that were drawn in each box during the previous step. Check and correct each syllable with students and say the word a 3rd time to activate the phonological processor. Students may break words apart by syllable. For example, they may write segregation, or they may break up words by morpheme. For example, segregation. And there may be variations. The goal is that students can arrive at the pronunciation. If their syllable boxes support the pronunciation, the variations are acceptable. If students break words into chunks that may not be pronounced, provide guidance and feedback. Finally, write the whole word to the right of the syllable boxes. Now you're ready to introduce the word's meaning by presenting a student-friendly definition. You might tell students the explanation or have them read the explanation with you, or present, or have students determine critical attributes. For example, you might display the word segregation with the following critical attributes: a practice or policy that keeps different people separate from each other. Then you can introduce the definition. Segregation is a practice or policy that keeps different people separate from each other. So if there is a policy or practice that keeps different people separate from each other, it is segregation. Students should say the word corally with their peers and with their teacher. I also like to use modified syllable boxes for this activity because it allows for the definition to be written directly under the syllable boxes. Again, you may not use this for every single vocabulary word. You may decide to use this strategically, but I cannot recommend this routine strongly enough. It's a thoughtful scaffold for students with reading difficulties and English learners, but it also benefits typical and gifted students because it makes our language more transparent. It also doesn't add a lot of additional steps or monopolize instructional time, so literally everyone wins. Another way to support syllabication is to ask the following questions. How many vowels do you see? In the word basket, there are 2. Are the vowels together or apart? In this case, they are apart. How many syllables are in the word? 2. You may decide to show and tell the students how to break the word into syllables in writing, ensuring that at least one vowel is present in each syllable. This is imperative for ELA teachers and interventionists, but it's not a bad tool to have in your toolkit as a content area teacher when students are completely stymied by your vocabulary. According to Marcia Henry, as students become more proficient in decoding, words become more complex, and the length of complexity of words increases. Students must shift from decoding by sounds to decoding by morphemes in order to tackle more complex multisyllabic words. As indicated by the color-coded morphemes on this slide, this excerpt from a high school level Ohio State test demonstrates the ubiquity of roots and affixes in complex texts. If students know how to use morphology as a tool, they're better equipped for navigating these texts and assessments. If students know that anthro refers to people and morph refers to change, they are better equipped to arrive at an approximation of a definition for the word anthropomorphized, for example. Morphology differs by discipline because different disciplines use different words, but the frequency or value of prefixes, suffixes, and especially combining forms differs by discipline. This means that ELA teachers cannot be expected to do all of the heavy lifting when it comes to morphemes. We must all own and explicitly teach the morphemes that are frequently utilized within our respective disciplines. This is a list for future reference of frequent prefixes found in social studies or history, such as dis, as in dispose, dispute, disarm, disparity, and dissent. In history, we frequently see suffixes such as ist, as in words like capitalist, colonist, abolitionist, and federalist. And we also see Greek roots such as arch in words like anarchy, monarch, and oligarchy. In mathematics, we commonly see prefixes such as in, like an intersect and interval. We see common prefixes in math like I or iv, as in relative and qualitative. We see frequent Greek roots in math such as hedron, as in octahedron and polyhedron. We see frequent prefixes in science such as in, as in inert and invent. We see frequent suffixes in science, such as ism, as in organism and metabolism. We see frequent Greek roots, such as endo, as in endocrine and endospore. We see common prefixes in ELA, such as pre, as in preview and predict. We see frequent suffixes in ELA, such as shun, as in cohesion and tension. So basically what we need to remember is that morphology is an essential component of instruction. And when students are explicitly taught morphemic awareness, the growth in vocabulary leads to improved reading comprehension. It also improves spelling. This ability is critical not just for literacy growth, but also for vocabulary understanding in the content areas. The following routine is a simple way to teach students to use word part clues to derive word meaning using content-specific terms. In the first step, students look for the root word and ask, what does it mean? In step 2, students look for a prefix and ask, what does it mean? And step 3, students again look for a suffix and ask that familiar question, what does it mean? And the final step, students put the meanings of the word parts together and ask, what is the meaning of the whole word? The resulting definition will be an approximation, but students may employ this strategy whenever they encounter unknown words in complex texts. Another simple way to establish syllable and phoneme awareness is to have students circle prefixes, underline roots, and box suffixes. Phoneme grapheme mapping is another way to provide support for students with reading difficulties. It allows you to isolate specific sounds and spelling patterns within your vocabulary words to help them orthographically map or unitize the spelling patterns for each word. This works with simple words such as star, where the phoneme s is isolated, the phoneme t is isolated, and the R-controlled vowel R is isolated. Note that 2 letters go into one box for that R-controlled vowel because they work together to make one sound. This may be extended to more sophisticated terms like isotherm, as shown below. But if a word is multisyllabic, like thermodynamics, the general recommendation is to use syllable boxes like those shown earlier in this presentation instead. Another short but meaningful activity that could be woven into your daily routines involves word building with one root. This word matrix allows students to build multisyllabic interrelated words by adding and subtracting prefixes and suffixes, sometimes multiple prefixes or suffixes. Using the root spect, students may record words like inspect, inspection, inspecting, respect, respectful, respected, retrospect, suspect, suspected, prospect, introspect, and many other words. You could use this as a jumping off point for sentence level writing or discussions about how particular affixes change the meaning or function of words as they're added. You may also have teachable moments as students create non-words that are impossible because of limitations on morpheme productivity. What does this look like in a simple context? Let's say you're a science teacher and you want your students to read the NPR article, Why Some People Evade Colds and Others Don't. You note that 3 related words appear in this article: infections, infect, and infectious. This provides a perfect opportunity to explore morphemes and engage in some wordplay to support comprehension. You might decide to build a text set around the NPR article, including 2 additional books. One is called What Are Germs? And the other is called Microbes, Friend or Foe. And you might also fold in an additional article called Bacteria and a video called Ask Smithsonian, What's the Difference Between Bacteria and Viruses? You might introduce the terms through sound chaining. You can provide laminated colored cardstock or other tokens to mark changes to several words in a row. This can be done with individual sounds at the primary level, but it's also powerful with morphemes. Students substitute, add, or delete sounds or meaningful parts by changing one at a time in this activity. So here's an example. I can introduce the word infectious by asking the following questions. What is the final stable syllable in infectious? Students will say shuts and tap that card and put a card out for it. What is the prefix in infections? They will tap it and say in. I will ask, what is the root in infectious? They will say fect and tap the root. The students will always touch each respective box as questions are asked. And next, I can instruct them to delete the final stable syllable in infectious and say the new word, infect. And they would take away the last card to do that. Then they would add the final stable syllable, shun, to infect and say the new word. They would add the prefix dis to infection and say the new word, disinfection, and add a card to the front to change. And then last, we would change the final stable syllable to disinfection, in disinfection to ed, and say the new word, disinfected. And they would replace the final card with another to do that, showing that they're manipulating that morpheme. If you're interested in this activity, more examples are provided in improving morphemic awareness using base words and affixes, and also in improving morphemic awareness using Latin roots and Greek combining forms, both of them by Sandra Dona. Morphemic awareness activities like the one I just talked through illuminate the meaningful chunks in words. Teachers might utilize morphemic awareness lessons to engage students in the addition, deletion, and manipulation of morphemes without focusing on the orthography or spelling. In this activity, students construct several related words as they physically manipulate colored discs or laminated cardstock as a warm-up for vocabulary lessons or the reading of a complex text, in this case, to support the reading of To Kill a Mockingbird. This morphemic awareness activity may be extended by distributing a root word tree and a pre-populated list of words that were previously constructed. As a next step, students may use the word list to create clusters of related words as shown on the root tree on this slide. Providing a matrix is a great way to differentiate this activity for students with giftedness in particular because it supports the construction of additional words and provides stretch. As we explore vocabulary terms, simply underlining the root word, circling the prefixes, and boxing the suffixes as already discussed, highlight the inner workings of English and encourage students to pay attention to the meaningful parts. Our lessons don't have to be flashy or labor intensive to be explicit and effective. The last instructional suggestion I will advocate for in this presentation is root-based word webs and diagrams. These student-created graphic organizers may be representations of our root system as pictured, or they may be drawn as concept webs with interconnected bubbles. I personally love this representation. Since one morpheme should be taught at a time, you could fill out words containing fact, fect, or fic, one at a time, making this a great tool for cumulative note-taking or review. Approximately 70% of students in middle school and high school still have difficulty with vocabulary, and here's what we want to do pretty much from kindergarten onward, but especially with an eye toward the struggling students in middle and high school. We want to provide explicit student-friendly definitions and multiple exposures to those keywords. We want to teach examples and non-examples, word origins, derivations, and word families. We want to connect known concepts to unknown concepts and teach high-utility Tier 2 words, word learning strategies, and discipline-specific words, while soaking them in an environment that is full of word consciousness. This is an example by Anita Archer showing the word perpendicular. And you can see examples here that the top example is an example of perpendicular, where two lines are intersecting and forming a right angle. The second example is also perpendicular because two lines intersect and form a right angle. The third example does not show perpendicular lines because although the lines intersect, they do not form a right angle. And the final example here is a non-example because these are not lines, they are line segments, therefore they will not ever intersect. We want to guide students in analyzing examples and non-examples using critical attributes. So we can display examples and non-examples like this on a screen and ask students questions to assist them in discerning between examples and non-examples. So we might ask, are there two lines? Do the lines intersect? Do they intersect at a right angle? Are the lines ultimately perpendicular, yes or no? We might also have them discern between examples and non-examples with a partner or on a graphic organizer. And we might have them make a T-chart labeling the left column perpendicular lines and the right column not, and have them draw examples and non-examples in the columns. And then work with a partner to check and see that all the examples are perpendicular and that the non-examples are actually not perpendicular. We also want to prioritize asking deep processing questions. So saying things like, perpendicular lines are very important when you do some home projects. Think, when would knowledge of perpendicular lines be critical? And then share those ideas with partners as you monitor and record some ideas that you can later share with the class. It is important to remember that multiple exposures are crucial. We do want our students to continue using resources that you probably already utilize, like interactive word walls and vocabulary journals. We want students to continue using graphic organizers such as Frere models, mind maps, semantic mapping, categorizing, and concept mapping to deepen vocabulary knowledge. Additionally, we want to intentionally integrate resources like root trees, word matrices, and syllable boxes to support morphology and syllabication within our vocabulary lessons and our larger units, because all of these provide variety for our students. Etymology is another layer of our language that is worth exploring as we seek to help our students understand the words in English and in our curricula. We're going to briefly watch this video by Gina Cook and reflect upon how increasingly deeper understanding of the words we teach will better equip us to go beyond the surface level.
You have probably seen an email or an internet post about how weird and random English spelling seems to be. But what if I told you that it actually makes perfect sense? In fact, that's spelling's job, making sense. Think of spelling a word as peeling back the layers of an onion. The first layer is a word's sense and meaning. Often there are multiple layers of meaning. Another layer is the word's structure. Think of the center of the onion as a word's base element, its essential kernel of meaning. A free base element like ONE or TWO can stand on its own as a word, like one or two. A bound base, like the RUPT of erupt or rupture, needs another element in order to surface in a word. Two or more bases give us compounds, like twofold or someone or bankrupt. Once we figure out a word's meaningful elements, we can peel back its history to shed a little more light on why it's spelled as it is. The word to, for example, needs its W in order to mark its connection to words like twice, 12, 20, twin, and between. A word's history is another layer of the onion. With that understanding, let's investigate the word one. First, we need to check in with what it means. Unique, single, solitary. One's historical layers include its relatives only, once, 11, and even n, and any. But it's the morphological relatives, the ones that share the base ONE, that are really astonishing. There are the familiar ones like anyone and one track and oneself. Those are obvious. But let's take a look at some unexpected derivations of the word one. The word alone is built from the prefix al plus the base one. It's the same al prefix that we see in always, already, almighty, and almost. It means all. The word alone means all one. It was misanalyzed in the Middle Ages as having the prefix a, like in asleep and awake and around, and a new base was born, lone, which then developed into its own family. In the word atone, we find the familiar preposition at, compounded with the base one. See, when we atone for something we've done wrong, we attempt to make things whole again, to fix what's broken, to be at one again with whomever we hurt. But here's perhaps the best one of all, the word onion, which is also frequently derided as irregular or crazy for its spelling of with an O. But again, if we look into the word's structure and its history, it's a mystery no more. When we look at the roots of an onion, we learn that it is written as one plus ion, the same suffix we find in tension, action, union, and thousands of other words in English. Unlike the many cloves in a head of garlic, an onion has a single bulb. It is marked by the state or condition of oneness. Like an onion, English is one single writing system shared across time and space. Its structure and its history have many layers, and peeling them apart can really add flavor to our language and spice up our understanding. See, spelling is never just about spelling, but about how written words make sense. It's almost enough to make you want to cry.
I'm going to go back for just one more second here to make the point that at the bottom of this slide, you'll see a link to a helpful tool called Etym Online. It's an etymological dictionary that is an invaluable tool for instruction. So it might be especially helpful for language arts teachers, but content area teachers, you may also find opportunities for using this tool to deepen your understanding of your own content. So we were just talking about peeling back the layers of our language and the layers of an onion in that case, and the meanings and the words that were related to it. The interesting thing is that language is a lot like an onion, and it can be conceptualized through concentric circles as shown on this slide. The core is comprised of phonetics, which are speech sounds, and phonology, which are the phonemes. And this really undergirds morphology, the words, the syntax, those phrases and sentences. semantics, the literal meaning of those phrases and sentences, and also pragmatics, the meaning in context of discourse. And although we don't all have to be linguists to be good teachers, as demonstrated through this presentation, an understanding and deepening of our understanding about the way that the English language works, seen through the lens of our respective disciplines, it really can make all of the difference for students. So I implore you to work together across content areas to consider new ways to support your students' literacy development and to impart disciplinary literacy to them in thoughtful ways. There's just so much more that I could share with you if we had time together. I always feel like I'm leaving so much out because there's so much good stuff to share. But I sincerely hope that this provides all of you with a starting point, and I hope that you can identify a next step to take as you strive to make disciplinary literacy a part of your collaborative school culture, and as you strive to weave the science of reading into the very fabric of your lessons. If you have any questions about anything in this presentation, or if you would like to attend any of my remote lead teacher meetings, please feel free to email me at amanda.nickerson@apps.spark.org. This year, we are exploring fluency, vocabulary, oral language, and comprehension during our meetings together. I really believe it's an exciting time to be in education. I'm excited about the direction that we are headed in, and I want to thank you personally for your commitment to your students and learning. Have a wonderful day. If you are interested in an additional layer of support, you may decide to access my live binders through the tiny URL on this slide. I wish you the very best of luck this year.